So you got the idea what I mean. So you have the interface definition. We already defined our interfaces. That's with the basic CRUD operations. If you need additional ones, maybe you have different idea as a concept, you can do this other way around, but we put it here just one example how can do yourself the CRUD operations, CRUD implementations, I mean that one. So, and then we define the interfaces as a service annotation there. We don't need it service annotation here, just you need here service annotation. We have a service impl class. We extend the implements the interface that we have. So this is the most important one. So we define our own repository. That's we already had it in their own repository. Extend the CRUD operations, and we define our interface, and then we define our implementation classes here. So AutoWare, that's I said, to those who are new, just Google it and get it the idea of what I mean. So you annotate the service, and we AutoWare our repository, that's we custom repository that's we define, and that's simply we interface is here, implement interface, simply call the repository find all, find one. So you see the find all methods, so we get all the existing record information from the database, from your backend database. In this case, Mongo GemFire. For other case, maybe MongoDB, Cassandra, Redis, GemFire, or MySQL, or Postgres, or Oracle. It doesn't matter. This is standard CRUD operation methods for the find all from the backend server. And you get this find one, specific one. You just pass the ID of your with records, which record you try to load it, and then you check it. Okay, if the result is not null, and if it's null, then you just empty data. That's I said. This is the depending how we implement. You have more control here, all sort of conditions, but you give it to you one of the example how can you handle have more control if you have your own repository definition or own implementation. That's I mean this is the part your own implementations. So find one, specific one, and this is the save method, new entry record, the post HTTP post methods. This is the HTTP get methods, and this is also the HTTP get method with the path parameter. I will show you when I implement the controller part. So the save methods, you see pass the you consume your domain objects, and then this is simply repository save methods, the pass the object, it will automatically save object and return if the save is successful, and you get the return object with all imported values, and if it's not save successfully, return the empty objects. But you can do also the void methods here, returning voids, and also here the returning object, and also list of object and delete. I have different approach. We have maybe delete, you can void it, return void, but for our case the complete object, what part of the information we updated, but it's depend on your design or implementation. So we pass the ID, we look for the specific record from the database in the backends, and then get the record. If it's not null, we cannot save it, just like empty list, and then if it's there, then we pass the object, and that's all. And the delete methods very simple, just we pass the ID and find one, and after that we call the repository delete methods, and that's all finish. The very simple, very standard cases, and that's I need to little bit discuss here. So let's say you have a microservice, the web service with GemFire. Some microservice you need to call from the other third-party microservices, more than maybe the Yahoo, maybe the Google, maybe the Amazon, or maybe the PayPal. You need to microservice to call from there. So that means you have a microservice client to call the microservices and then implement the use services based on the microservice that you get it and get the information and implement here. That's why I said if you have your own implementation here, then you have a possibility to call all the microservices that you need, maybe Google's, maybe PayPal, maybe Yahoo, or then you just call the microservices, implement the microservice clients, the REST clients, and call the what information you need, and then build the use services here. That's I mean the really professional way. That's why we have a lot of examples like that. You provide the microservice, some part of the microservice, other company provide other microservices, other company provide another microservice for payment, for documentation, for reporting, for invoicing. This type of microservice coming from the third party, but you are sitting to implement your microservices based on the other microservices. That's why you need to communicate those microservices and to gather your information, what you need, and build your microservices. And this is the way you can communicate all the services and then input what information you need, and then based on that one you did your implementation. That's I mean the I will give it to you later in screencast how can communicate the third-party microservices and implement the microservice that you are trying to do, or you finding use cases to integrate those microservices and build your microservices, expose your microservices based on the other microservices, and then you build your applications. That I mean. So this is case is a really flat, you can say the flat microservice implementation basic CRUD operation for the enterprise level. But complex cases you need to be consume other microservices and build your domain model based on that, and implement your services based on the your requirement specification from the other microservice, and then end of the day you expose your microservices as a for creating your web application. That's I mean. So we cover our configurations. We cover, of course, the configuration depending on your backend server, depending on the GemFire, Cassandra, MongoDB, Elasticsearch, MySQL, or Postgres, depending on the microservice. But we cover this case GemFire microservice, the standard packaging structure. We define our models, our domain models, and we define all the repositories that we need, a default repository and a customized repository, and then we define our service implementations and the customs implementation of the CRUD operations and complex queries, complex functionalities into our custom implementation with extending our service interface definition and implement the services here. So now with the final part, we need to define our controller, because we define our own service implementation. For other case, we need to define the controller. If you go to the resource, mean the controller packet, we defined our controllers. This is our customs controller. So you see REST controller, we define request mapping with service consumer info resources, and we auto-aware, it's a logging mechanism. So auto-aware the service consumer info service, we interface definition that's we define, and then we define the request mapping. So request mapping method is get methods and get created status. So what is the service get methods as status? Okay, status maybe the okay sets in. Okay settings. Sorry, let's see why is it not. Moment. Some problems on Eclipse. Doesn't matter, but we can continue that one. So it's compiling. So oops. So okay, this was typing mistake, and so it's okay. And then see we're calling our service, and then we called our implementations here, returning the list of service information. Very simple, very standard. We pass the ID. We pass the ID, and then the path parameter, the path variable, pass the ID, and loading for the specific, calling our service implementation, and pass the ID for a specific record loading. So it has maybe it's some okay setting, again the okay. So then you have the post methods, the created status, and then you see the post method, it has a request mapping with the post methods and the HTTP request. With this implementation, you can make reshuffle again other way, depending how you structure it. For this is one of the example, how can you request mapping handle, request response handle, maybe you case different request mapping handle. Maybe you can write down here the exceptions, and then through the exceptions and control more things. But I give it to you as the standard basic structure of the implementation. But as I said, we are continuing the further use cases and further exception handling cases. Just follow one basic one, then we can get the next one. Service configuration information, we have the object injected, that's the request body, and then the consumer pass the service consumer the model domain models, pass here and save the domain models. So he says created, okay, this one is okay. You have again the put methods, the put the update cases, we pass the ID, we look for the ID first, that's the implementation, that's we said already here, our implementation class. the update cases. So we pass the ID, look for the specific record, and then if his record is